Okay, then a comprehensive victory in the end in the Cup semi-final for Broch Rangers, but they found themselves down in the game. Callum, obviously Jordan McRae gets them back in front with two great finishes before half-time. Keith sort of then let it run away from them, but credit to Broch because they played some great stuff in the second half.
Yeah, in tricky conditions, and I mean, I was impressed with their new pitch, but there were areas of it, understandable, that were quite soft. But I mean, as you've probably seen in the highlights, we sort of seemed to have all 4 seasons in 90 minutes. It was quite something, but I think the strength of the wind as well was a factor. And Keith, and probably it was swirling, but probably had more of it in the first half. And I think once they got in front, you would have liked to have held that lead and ideally gone in at least level or preferably in front. But even then, the start of the second half, as Craig Ewan said in his interview, they needed to try and ensure that they stayed in the game in that sort of third quarter. But Broch, I mean, it was 3 goals in 9 minutes, 51 to 60, which, you know, just completely kills the tie. But that's what Broch are capable of, and we've seen that over many years, that they can do that to any team. Obviously, I mean, Keith will look at it and pick out things they could have done better and things like that, but I thought Broch, in terms of their sort of forward players, really slick. I mean, Jordan McRae, I thought all round took his goals well, but even some of his link-up play and just layoffs and things like that were really good. Andy McRae, probably one of his slightly quieter games, I still thought he was decent. And then on either flank, Mark Shewan and Paul Brindle were a constant threat, so I don't think you can really pick any faults in that department. And at the end of the day, Cup semi-final, however you do it, it's about getting through, and Broch did it emphatically.
So they'll now play Fraserburgh in the final. Do we know, obviously that game was meant to be on Saturday?
Well, I was going to say, Ali obviously at the time of the interview after the game didn't know when the final would be, but and Ali sort of touched on it, but since that's happened, we've discovered it'll be venue still the same, Harlow Park, Inverurie, Sunday the 3rd of December. And from a Broch perspective, they're not particularly happy with the venue for the final, and I can sympathise with why, because if you're looking at it on a geographical basis between Fraserburgh and Broch, and I looked this up, it's 153 miles between the two places. So in terms of a sort of meet in the middle point, if you will, somewhere like Forres or Nairn, or even in terms of having a similar distance to cover, even Strathspey, Grant, and those are sort of probably the 3 that are in the, you know, closest to being in the middle. But there are, in Broch, I would obviously prefer to have the final somewhere like that, or certainly closer. But I mean, I'm not necessarily here to criticise why the decision's been made, because I understand there are other factors at play, and where sponsors might like a final and things like that, and it's a sort of difficult one because you need to try and find a balance between somewhere that kind of suits all the factors as best they can. And some people might say Inverurie doesn't, and others will say it does, and ultimately the decision's been made and that's it. The one thing I do particularly sympathise a wee bit, Broch, I've spoken about their supporters and the fact it's on a Sunday, potentially maybe, and more people having work the next day, maybe, I don't know, could put some people off travelling potentially. But in terms of wanting it to be a showpiece and a sort of standalone on the day, the Highland League's hand has really been forced in that regard, because obviously it was meant to be Saturday before the postponement, so with nothing else on, but they're now in a situation where you can't really go and postpone, say, 8 league games so it can take place on another Saturday. So really, unless you were, again, bumping eight league games back to a Sunday, which would have been more difficult to do, it realistically it probably had to be a Sunday, which is one of the unfortunate things. But I can see, I know I've rambled on about this for long enough, but I can see both sides of it and understand the arguments both ways. And I hope, regardless of what happens when it comes around, we'll get a great final, and there's plenty of supporters for both sides make the trip and make it a good occasion.
Okay then, win for Fraserburgh. I felt Callum at Turriff were slightly unlucky in the sense that they hit the bar obviously at the end of the first half with the score at 1-0. Then was it 1-0?
Yeah, hit the post at 2-0.
Yeah, and it's kind of like one of those things. If either of those go in, maybe it becomes a slightly different game.
Well, that's it. It's the old thing about taking your chances, really. I mean, I think over a piece, Fraserburgh probably did do a wee bit more in the final third in terms of chances overall, but like as you say, I mean, they've hit the crossbar, they've hit the post. Joe Barber's a really good save as well to deny Neil Gold in the set early in the second half, and you know, that's just the difference in the way Turriff have been playing this season. On another day, a couple of them go in and it's potentially a different game, but they didn't. And I mean, Fraserburgh, okay, maybe to ride their luck a wee bit, but they've kept a clean sheet again. They've scored 3 goals and they've sort of been back to more like what they would expect, because obviously their last 2 league games had conceded 4 to Huntly and 2 to Formartine. So to keep, I'm sure the clean sheet would have been greatly appreciated, and you know, just try and build on that for Turriff. Obviously, Graham Taylor taking the team at the moment, interim charge after Dean Donaldson's departure. I think really, if you were in his position, you'd be pretty upbeat as well about the performance. Maybe feel you could have defended the goals better, but you know, I don't think there was a huge amount between, on what we've seen anyway, a huge amount between the sides.
Yeah, I mean, Mark Howie afterwards hinted at something in this post-match interview that kind of that win put him back in amongst it in terms of the league table. Now, obviously, we know that the league table, no one looks at it at this point in the season, but it is like, it does make for healthier reading for Fraserburgh there. But I know they've played 10 games when other teams have maybe played 8 years, looking at 8 games for Brechin, but they are back in that sort of top pack.
Aye, but I mean, it's hard to really take too much notice of the table in a way. I mean, we obviously look at it because, you know, it's what we do really, but and annoy managers by asking them about it. But if you look down at, like, Formartine have played 11, Huntly, Buckie, teams like that have played 9, Fraser have played 10, I think the Banks of D perhaps played 10 as well, and then you've got like Brechin, I think Brora's maybe played 8, only played 8 as well, am I right?
You're correct.
Aye, so it's like, with the way it's been the start of the season, all the teams have sort of played different number of games, and I mean, all you can really do is sort of just keep trying to win and see where you go for there. I mean, we touched on it a wee bit last week, but given the sort of points have dropped already, Fraserburgh probably don't have a huge amount of margin for error now, you would suggest. I mean, you don't know, but they certainly won't want to be falling any further behind, so that's why sort of that win on Saturday was important.
Yes, and it's a pretty important game coming up this weekend as well, is it, against Brora?
Aye, definitely. It's an interesting one. I mean, it's kind of funny the way it works out, because you're expecting, like, you know, obviously the cup final was meant to be on Saturday, and the two of them could have been playing in that on Saturday, and then you're thinking the next week, well, it's sort of, you know, for whoever potentially lost, it would have been again
revenge mission.
Aye, straight back to it, try and, you know, settle the score. But now it's maybe who can put down a wee marker before this final on the 3rd of December. But I'm sure it'll be a cracking game regardless on Saturday. Okay,
well, there was one more game in the Breedon Highland League at the weekend. Inverurie Locos 0, Banks of D 2. Dean Donaldson's first game in charge of Locos following his move from Turriff United, which we mentioned earlier, ended in defeat. That was despite ex-Loco Gary Wood being sent off on his debut for Banks of D before half-time. Simulation and then a foul on Paul Coots were the reason for his 2 bookings. Lucky McLeod had already put D in front at that point. It sounded like Inverurie had a couple of chances after the break, didn't take them, and then Deshaun Golden, another Banks of D debutant who has joined on loan from Cove Rangers, he then adds the gloss later on.
Yeah, I think first thing to say is it's a really good result for Banks of D given the circumstances. I mean, Gary Wood was clearly, I think, fired up for his return to Harlow Park, and maybe just, I don't know, got the better of him slightly. He'll maybe tell me otherwise, and feel free to, Gary. But I think Banks of D, when you're playing, okay, they had the lead, but when you're playing that whole second half with 10 men, you'd probably expect to be under a wee bit of pressure and have to weather the storm a bit at times, and they've done that. And I mean, obviously good that the new man Deshaun Golden's come on and put the seal on things at the end, and I think the clean sheet probably pleased Josh Winton and Paul Lawson a lot, because prior to that they'd conceded 2 against Clachnacudden and 3 against Devon Vale, and we spoke on here about how they were maybe conceding goals and not giving themselves enough of a chance. So to shut Inverurie out's a real positive, and with the signings as well, with Gary Wood and with Deshaun Golden, they've certainly added to their attacking options, because in terms of sort of out and out strikers, they were maybe a wee bit lighter than some of the other clubs in that, in terms of depth in that area, in terms of compared with some of the other clubs they would like to be competing with. So I think both of those additions look quite good going forward. For Locos, I thought Dean Donaldson's comments afterwards were telling, in terms of sort of bemoaning a lack of guile, especially maybe second half when the onus was on them to break Banks of D down, and that hasn't been uncommon this season for Locos. Maybe they've found it difficult to really open teams up. So clearly there's probably a long road ahead and a lot of work to do to get Inverurie back to where they want to be, but I think there is now a sort of more long-term view perhaps, in terms of they want to go down a sort of route with a younger squad, and they've seen, you know, the sort of work that Dean's done with Turriff in terms of bringing through young players and improving them. So I think, to me anyway, I think he will get time to see if he can sort of put that stamp on things.
I noticed Jamie Mickey was back in the Locos team. The only reason I know that is because he tweeted that JM16 was back on the grass and he's got a few years ahead of him yet.
I wouldn't disagree with him. I believe he was away to Newcastle with his work last week, so missed a couple of games. But no, I think Jamie is one of them in terms of an experienced head as well, and his sort of enthusiasm for the game. I think he's a good person to have around. And you're mentioning Twitter, I can't resist mentioning this. There was a good bit of sort of Twitter spat with the Locos accountant Mark Young of Banks of D, formerly of Inverurie. When he was booked, it was described as Mark Young gets an inevitable booking for whatever, and then Mark afterwards fired back with, and we also got the inevitable win, thanks very much. So I thought, in terms of sort of banter and pettiness, that was a highlight of the weekend, really.
Before we look at the league table, there's probably a little more we can do on the managerial merry-go-round in the Breedon Highland League at the moment. Obviously, Clachnacudden at this point, at the time of recording,
as we sit here, they haven't got a manager yet, but yeah, I think
it's narrowing down.
It seems to be narrowing down. I mean, my understanding of the situation, the last I heard at the tail end of last week, was that Connor Gethins and Gordon Morrison, who was actually refereeing the Brora Keith game on Saturday, seemed to be the two leading contenders, shall we say. Whether that's changed, we'll maybe be able to find out for you after we've filmed this, but they certainly seem to be the sort of two main candidates for the Clark job. It's kind of slightly different maybe in a way. I mean, Gordon Morrison's obviously Clark legend, was a great player there, captain the last time when they won the League Cup 2014 and things. He's been a referee since he stopped playing in 2016, so he's, you know, sort of seen the other side of the game. And then you've got Connor, who hasn't, you know, still playing, hasn't managed or anything, but I think is keen to go down that route and would sort of back himself to do quite well. So it'll be interesting to see who they appoint. I mean, obviously the Turriff jobs up in the air in terms of sort of gauging what turf we're thinking. I don't think there's necessarily somebody that they've identified where they'll think we'll just go and get them. I think they're sort of interested to see who comes in. I mean, Jamie Watt's a name that a lot of people would sort of, obviously having been at Banks a D and then interim, well, assistant manager and then interim at Inverurie, was one that's thrown about. I mean, Andy Lowe potentially as well might want back in. I know Craig McEwen, obviously a great player in the Highland League with Fairmartin and Broch and things, is somebody that would be keen on going into management, so it's maybe one that would appeal to him. Beyond that, I'm sure there'll be a few others that I maybe haven't mentioned as well that'll throw their hat into the ring. And on the manager side of it as well, one manager who isn't going anywhere at the moment certainly is Alan Hale at Huntly, because he and his staff signed contract extensions till the summer of 2027 over the weekend, which clearly good news for the Black and Golds. I mean,
well deserved as well, you've got to say.
Definitely on. I mean, I think there's no question, given current form, that Huntly had been desperate to get those sorted out and sort of tie them down and keep trying to build in the right way. I mean, it's been pretty progressive, really. 3 years that they've been there, and now I suppose the challenge is to try and just keep moving up the way. And certainly on the start they've had to the season, they've got a good chance of doing that. Yeah,
not much further up they can go, to be fair. Those things are going. All right, well, as promised, the aforementioned league table. Let's have a look at the latest Breedon Highland League standings.